A Correspondent Candid with Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah, your story for 60 Minutes this week is about childhood trauma. And there's a lot of new science here about trauma-informed care. For anyone who's dealing with a traumatized child, what can they learn from your story?
Well, I think that this story is it is my hope that our story on trauma-informed care will not just be impactful, but will also be revolutionary. It certainly has caused a revolution in my own life. And I was struck by the story because it reminded me of my own childhood growing up in Milwaukee. It's not lost on me, the irony of being back in the same city, Milwaukee, where I grew up on welfare, poor, a lot of negative experiences, sexual abuse and all of that. What's the difference between a really bad childhood and being able to overcome that and a traumatic childhood and someone not being able to overcome that?
Really, it boils down to something pretty simple.
And the answer that Dr. Bruce Perry gives you is relationships.
If you also have opportunities to be connected to people in positive ways, that can buffer some of those effects. And as you get older...
I'd like to know more about that.
What he really means is love. He's a scientist, he's not going to use the word love, but it really is about how you are responded to, valued, trusted, and loved by those around you. So I didn't get it from the people who I felt I should have gotten it from. It can be anybody who cares enough about you to ask the question, what happened to you?
Could you trace back in your mind, it was that person who made the
I
difference?
know exactly who did it. I know exactly the moment I started to feel valued, and for me, it was school.
I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher because of Mrs. Duncan. And I haven't seen Mrs. Duncan since then, and Mrs. Duncan is here today. Mrs. Duncan!
The moment I felt the most value was in my fourth grade class when Mrs. Duncan said to me, I was the one who was chosen to lead the class and whatever it was.
So what was that like? I don't really remember. I do remember you.
I remember you were such a fluent reader.
Well,
if I had a class full of students like Oprah, I would have been floating on air.
Mrs. Duncan instilled in me this sense of believing that I mattered. And that is what every human being is looking for.
When you first heard that I had done something in life, did you know that it was me?
Yes, I kept up with you without your being aware of it.
And it was Mrs. Duncan who helped heal you?
For me, yes. It was Mrs. Duncan, and then it was my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Graham. It was school that made me feel a sense of value and connection.
You learned a lot on this story.
Oh, I learned a lot on this story. This story was life-changing for me.
Life-changing, really?
Life-changing. And people use that word rhetorically. Life-changing. It's changed the way I operate in my business, with my people, with my school. 1, 2, 3. You say that the most important question to ask of people who have gone through trauma is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you.
Yeah.
So when you see, a church being shot up, or you see, all of the headline-making stories of people seemingly gone mad, your first thought is, what happened to that person? Right. What has been life-changing for me is the question, what happened to you? Not what is wrong with you, but what happened to you? Which is an important question, not just for people who have been so-called traumatized, but it's the most important question you can ask of anyone. I can say that of all the stories I've ever done in my life and all of the experiences I've ever had and people I've interviewed, this story has had more impact on me than practically anything I've ever done.
It's changed the way you see everyone?
It's changed the way I see everyone. So when I have an employee who is acting out of line or who is just being a jerk, I don't think, what's wrong with that guy? What's wrong with that girl? What's wrong with that person? I think, I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened that caused them to behave that way. That's what this story did for me.